I hadn't set foot in Grandpa Theodore's study since his diagnosis, when the smell of his favorite coffee started making him nauseous and he stopped developing film in the makeshift darkroom. Even now, sitting in the burgundy leather chair where we'd spent countless evenings discussing light and shadow, I felt the weight of his absence pressing against my chest like a heavy camera strap. The warm afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk where family photographs competed for space with vintage camera equipment. Mom fidgeted with the delicate gold chain at her throat, her salon-fresh highlights catching the sunlight. Vincent sat rigid on the antique settee, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the lived-in comfort of Grandpa's creative sanctuary. His jaw was already set in that familiar expression of barely contained impatience. Brooke perched on the edge of Theodore's reading chair like she was posing for one of her Instagram stories, her cream-colored blazer too pristine for genuine grief. She kept glancing at her phone, probably already composing the social media post about family legacy that would come later. Ms. Patterson, Theodore's attorney for nearly 2 decades, cleared her throat and lifted a sealed manila envelope with reverent care. Her voice carried the weight of years when she began. We're here today to honor Theodore's final wishes and ensure his artistic legacy continues. She paused, looking directly at me with something that might have been sympathy. He was very specific about how this should be handled. For Brooke, she read from the handwritten document, the vintage Leica camera collection and usage rights to the Mountain View cabin. Brooke's perfectly glossed lips parted in surprise. I could practically see her calculating the Instagram potential of mountain sunrises and antique cameras. For Vincent and Celeste, Ms. Patterson continued steadily, the grandfather clock, select photography equipment, and a $20,000 donation to the local arts foundation in their names. Mom's face flushed red, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Vincent's hands clenched into fists on his knees. 20,000? Vincent's voice cracked with barely restrained fury. That's insulting. I've been supporting this family for 13 years. Ms. Patterson didn't flinch. She turned to the final page, her voice growing stronger. To Diana Morrison, my granddaughter, my artistic partner, my chosen heir. I leave my complete photography studio, all equipment and intellectual property, the downtown gallery space, and my financial estate totaling $15 million. The silence that followed felt like the moment between lightning and thunder, pregnant with the promise of destruction. Then Vincent exploded, his carefully maintained facade cracking completely. This is bullshit. He lunged forward, his face twisted with rage. She's not even blood. She's nothing to this family, just some burden Celeste dragged in when she was desperate. Before I could process what was happening, Vincent spotted the framed photograph on Theodore's desk, our last portrait together at his final exhibition, both of us grinning behind his vintage Hasselblad camera. He grabbed it and smashed it against the hardwood floor, glass scattering like broken stars across the Persian rug. You want to play family, he snarled, tearing the photograph in half with deliberate cruelty. You're not family. You never were. Just some orphaned mistake that your mother brought into our lives. I watched the pieces of that precious memory flutter to the ground like autumn leaves, each torn fragment representing a shared moment, a whispered photography tip, a bond that transcended blood. The photograph captured the exact instant Theodore had whispered, "You see the world through an artist's eyes, Diana. Never let them convince you to close them." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't beg him to stop. I just sat there, watching Vincent reveal exactly who he'd always been beneath the surface charm. But what he didn't know, what none of them realized, was that I had the original digital file backed up in 7 different locations. And Theodore had taught me that the real power wasn't in the print. It was in knowing how to develop the truth in the darkroom of justice. The last real conversation I had with Vincent ended with him cornering me in the kitchen after dinner, his voice low and menacing. If you can't respect what this family stands for, maybe you should find somewhere else to belong. I was 19, fresh out of high school, and I had just announced my acceptance to the Art Institute's photography program instead of the business degree Vincent had planned for my practical future. Photography is a hobby, not a career, he'd said, his real estate developer's mind unable to comprehend artistic value. You're wasting natural intelligence on meaningless pictures. Mom just stood behind him, wringing her hands, torn between her daughter and her financial security. 3 weeks later, I returned from my summer job at Morrison's camera shop to find my room completely transformed. My enlarger, my cameras, even the portfolio I'd been building since middle school, all gone. In their place sat a generic office setup and a motivational poster about success through persistence that made my stomach turn. The nameplate on my door had been changed from Diana to Brooke Study Space. I found my photography equipment in boxes in the garage, some pieces deliberately damaged. My favorite lens, a vintage 50mm that Theodore had given me for my 16th birthday, was cracked straight down the middle, destroyed with surgical precision. Brooke appeared in the garage doorway, arms crossed, watching me survey the wreckage. God, Diana, you're so dramatic. It's not like anyone was using this junk anyway. The cutting didn't happen overnight. It started with small cruelties that felt almost accidental, forgotten invitations to family gatherings, excluded group chats, my photography left out of family albums. Then my freelance clients started canceling mysteriously, all with vague excuses about budget changes and creative differences. When I finally confronted Mom about the pattern, she just shrugged, buffing her nails with practiced indifference. Actions have consequences, Diana. Vincent works hard to provide stability for this household. If you're not willing to contribute to the family vision, maybe you need to reconsider your priorities. I would have lost my studio apartment if Theodore hadn't quietly stepped in. The rent money appeared in my account 2 days later, transferred with a simple note, for the artist's sanctuary. Keep creating. After that, the support came like clockwork, never too much, never obvious enough to draw Vincent's attention, just enough to keep my camera batteries charged and my darkroom chemicals fresh. With the money came handwritten letters on his signature cream-colored stationery. He never lectured me about family loyalty or suggested I compromise my artistic vision. Instead, he sent critiques of my latest portfolio pieces, articles about groundbreaking photographers who'd changed the world, and stories about his own struggles as a young artist trying to make his mark. Every letter carried the same underlying message: he understood. In a family that saw my photography as frivolous self-indulgence, Theodore recognized it as the language I used to speak truth into existence. The last letter arrived 3 weeks before he passed, written in his careful, artistic script: "Survival isn't weakness, my dear Diana. It's the first proof of creative strength." I folded that letter into my camera bag and carried it through every rejected portfolio submission, every silent Christmas morning, every night I spent developing prints alone in my converted bathroom darkroom. I carried it still, even as the torn fragments of our last photograph lay scattered across his study floor and my hand instinctively reached for the hidden memory card in my jacket pocket, the one Vincent had no idea existed. Back in my converted studio apartment, I double-locked the door and kicked off the uncomfortable heels I'd worn to look professional for the family meeting. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from the adrenaline rush of watching Vincent reveal his true nature so completely in front of a witness. I pulled out the small digital camera Theodore had pressed into my hands during our last coffee date at Morrison's Cafe, disguised as a casual goodbye hug. "Only access the files," he had whispered against my ear, "if they try to destroy you completely." They had tried. And failed. I connected the camera to my laptop and navigated to the hidden folder marked with today's date. Inside were dozens of video files, each one time-stamped and labeled with clinical precision. Vincent Asset Planning Discussion. Celeste Diana Problem Resolution. Brooke Social Media Manipulation Strategy. My fingers moved across the trackpad without trembling as I opened the first video file. Theodore's voice filled my small space, calm and deliberate. "If you're watching this, Diana, then they've shown you exactly who they really are. Everything you need to reclaim your identity and your inheritance is in these files." I scrolled through hours of secretly recorded conversations, financial documents, and what appeared to be a complete digital forensics investigation spanning months. But the final folder made my breath catch completely: legal transfer completed. Inside was documentation showing that Theodore's photography studio, gallery space, and financial accounts had been legally transferred to his business partner, Diana Celeste Morrison, professional photographer. The name I'd been using professionally since I turned 18. The identity I'd built independently, outside of Vincent's sphere of influence. Theodore hadn't just anticipated their betrayal. He'd legally circumvented it months before his death. And now I had everything I needed to show the world exactly who Vincent's perfect family really was. I woke up the next morning to 17 missed calls and a notification that my professional Instagram account had been permanently suspended for community guideline violations. When I tried to log into my business website, the screen displayed domain expired even though I'd just renewed it 3 months ago. My heart started racing as I grabbed my laptop and attempted to access my cloud storage accounts. Access denied. My professional email? User not found. Even my online banking showed an error message that made my blood run cold. Account holder status, deceased. I stared at the screen, the words blurring as the full scope of their attack became clear. They weren't just trying to steal my inheritance. They were systematically erasing my digital existence, wiping out years of professional work, client relationships, and creative documentation. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe some kind of automated security protocol triggered by yesterday's chaos. But when I called my bank, the customer service representative's voice carried an uncomfortable edge of confusion. "I'm sorry, Miss Morrison," he said, and I could hear rapid typing in the background. "Our system shows a death certificate was filed for your account. Diana Celeste Morrison, age 28, photographer." His voice softened with genuine concern. "Ma'am, according to our records, you died 2 weeks ago." My throat felt like sandpaper. "That's impossible. I'm standing right here." There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of computer keys clicking. "Ma'am, I understand this is distressing, but the death certificate was officially filed 2 weeks ago through the county registrar. You'll need to contact them directly to resolve this discrepancy." I hung up before my composure could shatter completely. An hour later, I stood in the sterile government office, watching a clerk behind bulletproof glass type my name into her system. Her eyebrows shot up as she read her monitor. "Well, this is unusual," she murmured, turning the screen toward me. "You're listed as deceased, Diana Celeste Morrison. Death certificate filed under your full name 2 weeks ago." She looked up at me with a mixture of confusion and pity. "Honey, someone deliberately filed paperwork declaring you dead. This isn't a clerical error, this is systematic identity fraud." I walked out of that building feeling like a ghost haunting her own life. The world seemed tilted, unstable, as if the very ground beneath my feet could dissolve at any moment. As I fumbled with my car keys in the parking lot, a flash of movement caught my peripheral vision. Across the street, partially hidden behind a row of leafless trees, stood a familiar figure. Even from a distance, I recognized Brooke's distinctive silhouette. She wore oversized sunglasses despite the overcast sky and a pale blue silk scarf I remembered Celeste wearing to family functions years ago. She wasn't trying to hide. She was making sure I saw her, making sure I understood that they were watching, monitoring, controlling every aspect of my erasure. When our eyes met across the busy street, she didn't look away or pretend to be doing something else. She just stood there, phone raised, recording my reaction to discovering I was legally dead. I forced myself to walk calmly to my car, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me panic. But when I turned the corner at the next intersection, she was gone, vanished as efficiently as my digital existence. Back in my studio apartment, I spread every piece of documentation I could find across my small dining table: lease agreements, tax returns, professional licenses, bank statements. All proof that Diana Morrison existed, breathed, created art, and contributed to society. But someone with access to official government systems was systematically deleting me from every database, every record, every digital footprint I'd spent years building. I opened my laptop and stared at the hidden folder Theodore had left for me. The files were organized by date, extending months into the future like he'd orchestrated this digital resurrection long before his death. And buried at the bottom was a folder marked Emergency Protocol Identity Restoration. The small brass key had lived in my jewelry box for 10 years, wrapped in the same faded silk ribbon from Theodore's antique camera strap. He'd given it to me on my 18th birthday with a cryptic smile and instructions that made no sense at the time. When they try to make you disappear completely, this will bring you back stronger. Now I understood exactly what he'd meant. The address he'd written led me to an inconspicuous building in the Arts District, squeezed between a vintage record shop and a cafe that specialized in analog photography development. Meridian Digital Archives read the small brass plaque beside an unmarked door. Inside, the receptionist barely glanced up from her computer before checking the key against a digital database and nodding toward a secure elevator. "Level B, Unit 47, she said, handing me a temporary access badge. "Mr. Theodore's account is fully paid through 2030. Take all the time you need." The basement level felt like stepping into a digital fortress. Climate-controlled storage units lined both sides of a long corridor, each one protecting the creative works and personal histories of people who understood the importance of safeguarding their legacy against erasure. Unit 47 was larger than I'd expected. Inside, I found not just backup drives and documents, but an entire workstation setup, professional monitors, high-end scanning equipment, and several external hard drives labeled with dates spanning the last 5 years. The first drive contained perfect copies of everything: my complete digital portfolio, client contracts, business registrations, even screenshots of every social media post I'd ever created. But the second drive made my heart race. It was filled with surveillance footage I'd never seen before: Vincent meeting with men in expensive suits, bank records showing suspicious transfers, and what appeared to be months of documented evidence of his real business dealings. At the bottom of the file structure was a folder labeled Theodore's Insurance Policy. Inside were legal documents, audio recordings, and a video file dated 1 week before his death. I clicked it, and his familiar face filled the screen. "Diana," he said, his voice steady and clear, "if you're watching this, then they've tried to erase you completely. But they made one critical mistake. They assumed you were alone in this fight." Back in my apartment, I slid the USB drive into my laptop and clicked on the single video file inside. Theodore's face filled the screen, looking friendlier than I remembered but with that same sharp intelligence burning in his eyes. He sat in his favorite corner of the photography studio, golden hour light streaming through the tall windows behind him like a halo. "If you're watching this, Diana, then they did exactly what I knew they would. They tried to erase you completely." His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty, each word chosen with the precision of a photographer composing the perfect shot. "You were always the one who saw truth through the lens. The one who captured what others missed, felt what others ignored, never demanded credit for your vision. That's exactly why they feared you. And that's precisely why I trusted you with everything." He leaned closer to the camera, his weathered hands clasped together like he was holding something precious. "This isn't just about money or property, my dear. This is about memory, about legacy, about the stories we choose to preserve and the ones we refuse to let die. And if they tried to burn your story down, this recording is how you write the ending they never saw coming." The screen faded to black, leaving me sitting in the silence of my studio apartment with the weight of his absolute faith settling around me like a familiar camera strap. I knew exactly what I needed to do next, and more importantly, I finally understood that Theodore had been preparing me for this moment for years. The manila envelope was wedged behind my apartment building's mailbox cluster when I went to check for mail the next morning. No postmark, no return address, just my name written in block letters across the front: Diana Morrison, time-sensitive. Inside was a small USB drive and a handwritten note in script I didn't recognize: "They didn't destroy the real evidence. Check Theodore's emergency archive, password, Diana Saya 2024. I stared at the note for several minutes before walking back upstairs and accessing the cloud account. When I entered the password, terabytes of data appeared, not just documents and photos, but surveillance footage, recorded conversations, and what looked like months of comprehensive digital forensics. The first folder was labeled Vincent's Real Empire. Inside were photographs of him meeting with city planning officials, bank records showing suspicious transfers between his development company and offshore accounts, and recorded conversations where he discussed removing obstacles from prime real estate opportunities. But it was the second folder that made my stomach clench: Diana Erasure Project. Screenshots showed Vincent accessing my professional social media accounts using administrative privileges I'd never granted. Email threads between him and Brooke detailed their systematic plan to neutralize Diana's influence through fabricated client complaints, canceled contracts, and coordinated digital identity theft. The timestamps were methodical, clinical. They'd been planning my erasure for months, waiting for the perfect moment to execute their strategy. But the final folder contained something that changed everything: property ownership truth. Inside was a notarized document transferring full ownership of Vincent's primary development holdings to me, dated 8 months before Theodore's death. According to the legal papers, Vincent had been using Theodore's land as collateral for massive business loans that automatically became my legal responsibility the moment I inherited the property. I wasn't just the victim of their systematic attack. I was Vincent's unwitting business partner, with legal authority over every project that had built his reputation and fortune. And he had no idea that his attempt to erase me had actually handed me complete control over his empire. The address Theodore had given me led to a converted warehouse complex in the Industrial Arts District, the kind of place where photographers rented affordable studio space and artists developed their work away from prying eyes. The unit number was tucked in the back corner, accessible only through a maze of narrow corridors lined with the organized chaos of creative minds. Unit 23C looked identical to all the others until I used the key Theodore had hidden in his camera bag. Inside, I found what could only be described as a professional investigation center. Filing cabinets lined one wall, their contents organized with the same meticulous attention to detail Theodore brought to his photography. A large corkboard dominated the back wall, covered in photographs, documents, and colored string connections that mapped out relationships and timelines like something from a detective thriller. The air inside was stale but undisturbed, like a time capsule waiting to be opened. A single metal shelf lined the far wall, and centered on it like a carefully composed photograph, sat a black fireproof briefcase. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, revealing contents that had been waiting for this exact moment. The first thing I found was a manila folder containing my original birth certificate, not the version that had been altered when Celeste married Vincent. This one showed only my name, Diana Celeste Morrison. No stepfather's surname, no legal modifications. Just the truth of who I was before Vincent tried to rewrite my identity. Next were the letters, 15 in total, each one written in Theodore's careful artistic script. The dates corresponded to significant moments in my life: my high school graduation, Vincent and Celeste's wedding, the first Christmas I spent alone in my studio apartment. He'd written them but never sent them, storing his thoughts and observations like undeveloped film waiting for the right moment to be processed. One phrase appeared repeatedly across multiple letters: "They won't erase you, Diana. Not while there's still light to expose the truth." Beneath the letters was a notarized will, dated just 1 week after the fraudulent death certificate had been filed. Theodore's signature was bold and unwavering, his handwriting as steady as his resolve. In it, I was named sole beneficiary and creative heir. Not Brooke. Not Vincent or Celeste. Me. But what made my hands shake was the property deed underneath: Morrison Photography Gallery and Studio Complex. Owner, Diana Celeste Morrison. My fingers traced the embossed seal, the official stamps, the legal language that made it undeniably real. I hadn't just inherited a business. I'd inherited the cultural heart of the city's arts district, property worth millions that Vincent had been coveting for his development projects. I sat down on the worn wooden stool Theodore used for portrait sessions, clutching the documents to my chest and feeling the weight of my own name for the first time in years. I wasn't erased. I wasn't invisible. And they had no idea that the person they'd tried to delete legally owned the very foundation they'd built their schemes upon. Marcus Chen reviewed the evidence with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent years untangling corporate fraud cases. He spread the documents across his conference table like pieces of a complex puzzle, occasionally pausing to cross-reference details on his tablet or make notes in his precise handwriting. "This is comprehensive," he said finally, his voice carrying quiet satisfaction. "Identity theft, document forgery, estate fraud, and what appears to be a coordinated campaign of digital harassment and business interference. We're not just challenging a will, we're documenting systematic criminal behavior." The civil hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. I chose to handle the initial presentation myself, knowing that sometimes the most powerful testimony comes from the person who lived through the trauma. The conference room at the county courthouse felt sterile under harsh fluorescent lighting, a stark contrast to the warm creativity of Theodore's studio where this journey had begun. Vincent sat rigidly in his most expensive suit, flanked by a nervous-looking attorney who kept checking his phone like he was expecting bad news. Celeste had chosen a conservative dress that made her appear smaller, more sympathetic to potential observers. Brooke perched on the edge of her chair, scrolling through her phone with practiced indifference, probably updating her followers about the family drama while simultaneously documenting everything for her social media narrative. When the mediator called the session to order, I stood and connected my laptop to the presentation screen. "I'm here to address the systematic erasure of my legal identity and the fraudulent theft of my inheritance," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. Vincent's lawyer started to object, but I was already clicking to the first slide. Theodore's face filled the screen, recorded just weeks before his death in crystal-clear high definition. "If Diana is showing you this recording," his voice filled the sterile room with warmth and authority, "then Vincent and his accomplices have tried to erase her from existence completely. Let me be absolutely clear about my intentions. I changed my will because I discovered Vincent's true motivations for marrying my daughter." The room fell into complete silence. Brooke's phone slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. Celeste's face drained of all color. Vincent half rose from his seat before his lawyer's firm hand pulled him back down. But I wasn't finished. The next slide showed bank records, property transfers, recorded conversations, and photographic evidence that painted a picture of calculated manipulations spanning over a decade. "Enough." The mediator's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He looked directly at Vincent, his expression cold with professional disgust. "You didn't just attempt to defraud this court. You systematically tried to erase a human being from legal existence." Then he turned to me, his tone warming slightly. "This court recognizes Diana Morrison as the sole legal heir to Theodore Morrison's estate and creative legacy. All respondent assets are frozen pending criminal investigation for identity theft and fraud." I exhaled slowly, not from relief, but from the release of years of held breath. The damage was done. Vincent's empire was crumbling. Now came the reckoning, and I would be the one holding the camera. Brooke's first text arrived 3 hours after the hearing, after the local news had picked up the story of the family fraud scandal that was sending shockwaves through the city's development community. The message was desperate: "We need to talk. Please." The second was longer, more revealing: "Dad's losing everything. Mom's talking about leaving him. Can we please just work this out? Like we used to?" I agreed to meet her at the small coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse. Neutral territory, somewhere without the weight of family history or Vincent's hovering influence. She was already there when I arrived, hunched over an untouched latte, her perfectly curated Instagram aesthetic cracked around the edges. "I didn't know," she blurted out before I could even sit down. "About the death certificate, about hacking your accounts. Vincent told me you were just being dramatic, that we needed to protect the family business." Her voice shook with what seemed like genuine distress. I thought I was just helping with paperwork. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I set my phone on the scarred wooden table between us, screen facing down but recording app already running. After everything that had happened, I'd learned to document every conversation that mattered. "I swear, Diana, I never wanted it to go this far." Tears started forming in her eyes, smudging her carefully applied makeup. I thought we were just making sure you couldn't cause problems for the business. Problems? I repeated, my voice steady and quiet. She flinched at the single word. I mean, Vincent always said you were unstable. That you'd try to sabotage everything out of spite. She wiped her nose with a designer tissue. I didn't think you'd actually fight back. You always just disappeared when things got complicated. That part stung because it contained truth. I had been the one who walked away, who chose silence over confrontation, who disappeared rather than demand to be seen. But the girl who ran from family drama had learned how to develop her own strength in the darkroom of adversity. I'm sorry, she whispered, reaching across the table toward my hand. I was terrified that if I didn't go along with Dad's plan, he'd turn on me too. You know how he gets when people don't follow his vision. I studied her face, the genuine fear mixing with calculated manipulation, the real tears alongside the performative vulnerability. It wasn't that I couldn't see her pain. I just understood now that her comfort had always been purchased with my erasure. Without a word, I picked up my phone, stopped the recording, and stood to leave. Her voice followed me toward the door, growing more desperate with each step. Diana, please. We can fix this. I can help you fight Vincent. We can be sisters again. But I didn't turn around. Outside, the late afternoon air carried the scent of rain and possibility. I pulled my jacket tighter and walked away from the coffee shop, away from Brooke's promises, away from the girl I used to be who would have stayed to comfort someone else's guilt. In my coat pocket, my phone buzzed with a notification. The final automated email from Theodore's legal system had arrived, gallery transfer complete. Welcome home, Diana. The steps of the Morrison Photography Gallery felt solid under my feet as I climbed them for the first time as the legal owner. No protesters, no family members lurking in shadows, no journalists seeking dramatic quotes, just the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming space that had always been meant for me. I paused at the top step and turned to face the street, holding up the framed property deed Theodore had left for me. The afternoon light caught the gold-embossed seal as I raised my vintage camera, not for social media, not for validation, just for the permanent record. The image I captured showed my reflection in the gallery's front window, deed in one hand, camera in the other, with Theodore's final exhibition poster visible behind the glass. I didn't post it online. I didn't need external validation for this moment. I unlocked the gallery's front door and stepped into the space that smelled like developer chemicals and old wood, like possibility and homecoming. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny celebrations in the air. On the main wall hung Theodore's final gift to me, a massive black and white photograph of my hands developing film in his darkroom, captured without my knowledge during one of our last sessions together. Beneath it, a small placard read, Diana Morrison, Truth Through the Lens. I sat cross-legged on the polished concrete floor, surrounded by empty walls waiting for new stories, new visions, new truths to be revealed and preserved. In my camera bag was Theodore's last letter, the one I'd been saving for this exact moment. 4 words written in his careful script, now show them everything. This wasn't the end of their story or even the beginning of mine. It was simply the moment when I stopped being invisible and started creating art too powerful to erase. The walls around me were blank canvases waiting to be filled with all the truths they'd tried to bury. And I knew exactly which photograph would hang first, the image of Vincent's face when he realized I owned everything he'd built his empire on.